everybody, and I'm going to be in and out because it's like a crazy day here, but I think this is an important briefing, and I want to welcome everybody. I want to thank you for attending today's briefing on Central Asia, political prisoners, and ongoing human rights abuses. I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists, some of whom have traveled here to brief members of Congress and staff, and we're grateful to them. You know, Central Asia, it is a mistake to think of Central Asian countries only in relation to those around them. It is unfair to the 84 million people, a population as big as Germany's, who call the five nations their home. They each have magnificent histories, cultures, and languages. Their peoples hold their own aspirations for the future. All the Central Asian states, to varying degrees, systemically deny their citizens fundamental freedoms enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. None in the region have the right to freely change their government. As summarized in a piece published by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty last week, political space that once existed in the years after independence from the Soviet Union has dramatically narrowed. Even Kazakhstan, once the most democratic of states, has slipped into authoritarianism. Without effective opposition parties and with rights to freedom of expression and assembly curtailed, we see people resorting to mass protests to express their grievances, and this is often met by a brutal crackdown. A nationwide protest over corruption and prices in Kazakhstan in 2022 resulted in bloody January, in which more than 200 demonstrators were killed after the president issued a shoot-to-kill order. That same year, a crackdown on protesters in Tajikistan killed some 40 people. In Uzbekistan, victims of a 2020 family members who have been advocating for the rights of ethnic Kazakhs in the Xinjiang region of China. We are also joined by Kate Waters of Crude Accountability and Steve Swerdlow of the University of Southern California for their insight on human rights conditions in these countries. As always, in these hearings and briefings, we seek recommendations for U.S. policy. Last fall, President Trump hosted the most recent C5+1 dialogue with the heads of Central Asian countries at the White House. They cut deals on critical minerals, connectivity, and trade. Today, to date on everything that's said, and I look forward to the readout of the discussion. And again, you know, we need to be talking about the stuff we're talking about here today. And so hopefully this is the beginning of getting these issues raised to more prominence here in the House of Representatives, and I'll yield to Todd to tell us how we're going to proceed.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Thank you for the remarks. So now, again, I'm Todd Stein, Democratic Staff Director of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. I'll do short bios and then we'll go to the briefers in order. First, we have Gullian Nur, who is a Karakalpakstan human rights defender and president of Via Serica, U.S.-based nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing human rights liberties. Serikjan Bilash is a Kazakh human rights activist born in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China. He is founder of the advocacy organization Atatürk, Kazakh Human Rights, based in Kazakhstan, which has documented human rights violations and atrocities against ethnic Kazakhs, Uyghurs, and Kyrgyz in Xinjiang. He was listed, as the Congressman mentioned, in the Defending Freedoms Project and was released in 2019. And again, I apologize if I am getting any of these names wrong. You can all correct me in the course of the conversation.
I'll correct your pronunciation.
The Caucasus and Russia since the early 1990s, and has lived and traveled extensively throughout the region and speaks fluent Russian. Steve Swerdlow is a human rights lawyer and associate professor of the practice of human rights in the Department of Political and International Relations at the University of Southern California. An expert on the former Soviet region, Swerdlow teaches international human rights law, human rights research and advocacy, and on human rights across Eurasia. From 2010 to 2020, he was senior Central Asia researcher at Human Rights Watch. And so we'll first go to Julia.
Before I begin, I want to express my deep gratitude to the Landes Human Rights Commission for carrying forward the extraordinary legacy of Congressman Tom Landes, as the only voices are silenced, imprisoned, or forgotten, still have a place to be heard. Today, I'm honored to speak on behalf of the people of Karakalpakstan. 3 years ago, peaceful demonstrators in Karakalpakstan were killed, gravely wounded, detained, and disappeared while defending rights guaranteed by their own constitution. Today, many of those responsible remain in position of power, while people who demand justice remain in prison. Thank you for giving the people of Karakalpakstan an opportunity to be heard before the United States Congress. Before discussing political prisoners, it is essential to understand what Karakalpakstan is and why its constitutional status matters. Karakalpakstan is not another administrative region of Uzbekistan. In fact, Karakalpakstan was the second republic that declared its independence from the USSR after Lithuania did, and we signed a 20-year temporary agreement with Uzbekistan, saying that we will be part of them and with the conditions of Karakalpakstan. That agreement was temporary. It was not intended to settle the relationship permanently. Its 20-year period ended in 2013, yet no transparent negotiations followed, no new agreement presented to the people, and no public constitutional process was permitted to determine what the relationship between the two republics should become after the agreement is expired. Instead of answering this legitimate constitutional question through dialogue, people came to the streets of Nukus, the capital of Karakalpakstan. They were not demanding violently. They were not attempting to overthrow the government. They were demanding that the constitution be respected. They were defending rights already guaranteed to them by law. Bloody July did not begin because people suddenly became dissatisfied. It was a culmination of decades of political marginalization, nearly 10 years of unanswered questions, fight, and lethal force against peaceful demonstrators. The U.S. artillery officer who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, he analyzed the videos and he was horrified. He said that these were crimes against humanity. And the Uzbek government says that 21 people were killed, but it is the government's figure, not an independently verified accounting of the full human cost. Survivors, witnesses, victims' families, and Karakalpak human rights defenders believe that the true number of people may have been significantly higher. Because the authorities restricted access, controlled information, pressured families, and never permitted genuinely independent international investigation, the full number of those killed, wounded, and detained or disappeared remains unknown. Amnesty International noted from the beginning that the restriction on access made independent verification extraordinarily difficult. To this day, no complete and credible list of victims has been released. There has been no independent international investigation into the chain of command. There has been almost no meaningful accountability for the deaths and responsible for the violence. The authorities persecuted people who defended the constitutional rights of Karakalpakstan. The most prominent among them is Davlet Murat Tajimuratov. Davlet Murat is a Karakalpak lawyer, journalist, and human rights defender. He peacefully called upon citizens to defend Karakalpakstan constitutional status. He was violently arrested, and the United Nations expert received credible allegations that he was physically assaulted, threatened, tortured, and subjected to degrading treatment. He was later sentenced to 16 years in prison. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention determined that his imprisonment was arbitrary and called for his immediate release. Uzbekistan did not release, but they intensified the torture and they added additional years of imprisonment. He has suffered severe weight loss. He has reportedly had difficulty eating. He has been denied adequate and independent medical care. He has been subjected to isolation, degrading treatment, confiscation of his writings, and restrictions on communications with his family. United Nations experts have expressed serious concern for his health and safety. Dawlat Murad's case is not an isolated injustice. It has become a symbol of what has happened in Karakalpakstan. A number of Karakalpaks have already died in custody under deeply troubling circumstances. These deaths have created an enormous fear among Karakalpak people. When prisoners die, the question many Karakalpaks are afraid is painfully simple. Will Dawlat Murad become the next Karakalpak prisoner who dies in custody? Congress has an opportunity, and I believe a responsibility, to help ensure that he does not. The repression did not end when the streets of Nukus were cleared. It entered people's homes, workplaces, schools, and phones. Today, social media activity relating to Karakalpakstan is closely monitored. Authorities have targeted people for discussing Bloody July, Karakalpak sovereignty, political prisoners, the Karakalpak language, or demand for justice. Journalists and bloggers who work through YouTube, Telegram, Instagram, and other platforms have received lengthy prison sentences. Karakalpak students and activists have reported punishments for sharing or for touching a button on the telephone, for sharing a video, for liking a comment, for asking why the Karakalpak language is disappearing from public signs in Karakalpakstan. The purpose is not merely to punish individuals. It is to convince an entire people that discussing their history, demanding their language, or remembering that death has become a crime. Karakalpakstan is also experiencing a broader and more gradual erosion of its identity. Our language has been pushed out of important areas of public life. Independent Karakalpak media cannot operate freely. There is also demographic and political dimension. For years, Karakalpak communities have expressed concerns about the settlement of ethnic Uzbeks in Karakalpakstan, while poverty, environmental devastation, unemployment, and lack of opportunity have compelled many Karakalpaks to leave their homeland in search of work.
We only have the room till 12:30, so I want to make sure that we have enough time for all of our briefers to give their remarks and for questions.
Okay, I will finalize. Karakalpak women also expressed that they face forced sterilization. Yet Uzbekistan presented internationally as reforming and reliable strategic partners. The United States has legitimate interest in Central Asia, regional stability, counter-terrorism, critical mineral resources. Those interests are real, but a stable strategic partnership cannot be built on the silence of victims. A government cannot present itself as reform-minded while imprisoning peaceful lawyers. Today, I respectfully ask the Congress and the administration to take the following steps. First, publicly call for the immediate and unconditional release of Dawlat Murad, national investigation in Bloody July. Fourth, demand transparent and independent investigation into the deaths. Fifth, urge Uzbekistan to review and overturn convictions based solely on peaceful speech journalism. Sixth, insist that expanded cooperation with Uzbekistan, including trade investment, be accompanied by specific public and measurable human rights benchmarks. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. And we were joined by a group of high school students from Massachusetts, so that's really glad to have them here. Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, U.S. Congress. Thank you, Panelist Human Rights Commission for rescuing me from KGB jail of Kazakhstan, 2019. And to the international community, along with my own sister, are enduring severe physical and psychological torture and abuse in Kazakhstan KGB jail. They are currently held in Kazakhstan within a notorious Soviet-era KGB prison of Kazakhstan. To expose the existence of Xinjiang concentration camps, our organization has meticulously documented more than 10,000 video testimonies and has successfully facilitated to the rescue of tens of thousands of eyewitnesses. Notably, a teacher whom we rescued after she crossed the border from Xinjiang into Kazakhstan was subsequently honored with the U.S. Department of State's International Women Courage Award. The handsome Mike Pompeo and the handsome First Lady Melania Trump. And they publicly exposed these concentration camps on the global stage. Regarding their current location, 2 eyewitnesses whom we rescued, one Uyghur and one Kazakh, are presently in the United States. And another one Uyghur eyewitness and several Kazakh eyewitnesses are currently located in Europe. This comes to whole Central Asia into a parallel of Xinjiang region. So I call it Second Xinjiang. When the members of the Atatürk organization, Kazakhstani correctional facilities detain thousands of political prisoners. Notable among these detainees are the globally recognized marathon runner Marat Jilambay, alongside the journalist Duman Muhammad Karim, Aygerim Tlevjan, and Mirbolat Mirzatay. Most recently, Gulnaz Serikbayeva, another prominent member of Atatürk Kazakh human rights, received a substantial prison sentence due to historical social media publications in which she opposes the larger-scale migration of Russian and the Chinese citizens into Kazakhstan. The achievement of Atatürk Kazakh human rights are substantiated by the research of Ethan Gutman, a distinguished American scholar and the Nobel Peace Prize nominee. This is particularly evident in his recently published volume, The Xinjiang Procedure, where its primary and the most comprehensive body of evidence is sourced directly from the work of Atatürk Kazakh human rights. Let me introduce myself. My name is Serjan Bilash. I was born at Xinjiang, China. In 2000, I immigrated from Xinjiang to Kazakhstan, where subsequently obtained the citizenship through naturalization. In 2017, I founded Atatürk Kazakh Human Rights, an organization based in Kazakhstan dedicated to exploiting Kazakhs, Uyghurs, and the Kyrgyz population within the Xinjiang detention network. Atatürk Kazakh Human Rights, also known as Atatürk Erkler or Real Atatürk Volunteers, is a human rights organization dedicated to documenting and publicizing the internment and the persecution of ethnic Kazakhs and other Turkic minorities in China's Xinjiang regime. Founded in 2017 by myself, the group has faced the continuous state harassment due to the highly sensitive political nature of its operations. Today, our organization has gathered approximately 10,000 for the existence of these concentration camps, and though the Kazakh government has repeatedly denied the Atatürk Kazakh human rights registration as either a political party or non-government organization, NGO, on technical grounds, authorities have paradoxically registered the 2 pro-government and the pro-Chinese organizations under the exact same name of us. State-sponsored suppression and judicial harassment, judicial subjugation via diplomatic coercion. In April 2026, a Kazakh court sentenced 19 activists associated with Atatürk Kazakh human rights. A direct diplomatic note issued by the Chinese consulate in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Kazakh prosecutors escalated what were initially minor infractions into serious criminal charges of inciting ethnic hatred. Notably, the officials' indictment explicitly cited the Chinese diplomatic note as the legal justification for the charges. Targeting or organizational leadership, Atatürk has been systematically dismantled by the state authorities. As a founder, I was arrested by Kazakh authorities 2019 and subsequently forced into exile in the United States after being coerced into halting my first via digital surveillance threatened through their remaining relatives in China, and tracked my suspected Chinese operatives operating within Kazakh border, entered bands of foreign experts, and the Kazakh government refused the scholar Jena Bunin and the Danish scholar Rune Steinberg entering Kazakhstan. Both of them are the research based on Atatürk Kazakh human rights. The case, and also my sister's, Patika Blash's case, the midnight raid, June 25, 2026, Kazakh law enforcement and the security officials forcibly entered the home of my sister, Batiha Bilash, in the village of Saymasai. Authorities. Okay. And my sister is not a human rights activist. I just used her bank account, and my supporters sent money via her bank account to me, and now she's in prison with very high sensitive cardiological condition. And she was threatened by Kazakh KGB, and she told me inside the prison, called me in video, and she begged me to stop all my activism linked the Xinjiang concentration camps and all my activism in America. And if I not agree, and the Kazakh KGB will sentence her from 3 to 7 years in prison. And secondly, the most important, why Atatürk Kazakh human rights important to America? The American foreign policy is based on the human rights issue in China. And the human rights records in China is based on, especially based on Xinjiang concentration camps. And the Atatürk, we offered 98% of all eyewitness video testimonies. And the 95% of the all eyewitness who Kazakhstan is very important to America. You know, after the Russian-Ukrainian war, almost 3 to 5 million Russians escaped from Russia and so-called settled in Kazakhstan, and they registered the companies and they get technicals and other things who sanctioned by Western democracies. At the same time, they have one railway, China, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran railway. And why Iran is continuing to fight against America? How could they get the missiles and other techniques? The China, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran railway is playing a huge role inside. And the Kazakhstan now acting against Western democracies. They sentenced 19 of our team members who exposed all factors, 98 facts of Xinjiang concentration camps. And my sister, Batika Bilash, now as a hostage kept in KGB prison of Kazakhstan. So I respectfully urge the United States government to direct its attention toward Kazakhstan and assist the Kazakh population in addressing foreign geopolitical encroachment. Additionally, I appeal for international support to secure the immediate release of my sister, as well as the detained members of the Atatürk Kazakh Human Rights Organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kate.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, afternoon, wherever we are, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important briefing. It's an honor to be here alongside my distinguished colleagues. I've been asked to speak about ongoing human rights abuses and political prisoners in Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. Both countries are becoming increasingly repressive and implementing troubling changes in the human rights sphere. Turkmenistan is by far the most repressive government in Central Asia, on par with North Korea. And Kazakhstan has historically been, Kazakhstan's Freedom House ranking for 2025 was 23 out of 100. With 5 out of 40 points for political rights and 18 out of 60 for civil liberties. Turkmenistan's Freedom House ranking for 2025 is 1 out of 100, 0 out of 40 points for political rights, and 1 out of 60 for civil liberties. In Kazakhstan, in the past 5 years, the overall human rights and political environment has become increasingly repressive. Bloody January, as the Congressman mentioned, revealed a violent and repressive regime, and to date, many have not received justice for the violence and torture committed by the authorities. Since then, numerous activists, journalists, and human rights defenders have been detained and arrested. Most recently, the so-called reforms to the Constitution of Kazakhstan have resulted in substantially negative impacts on civil society organizations and independent media. Ratified in March of this year, the new constitution, international organizations, in the period before the upcoming parliamentary elections in August. And on July 7th, Kazakhstan's top court ruled that President Tokayev could run for another 7-year term when his current term is up, effectively strengthening the executive branch. For civil society organizations working on key issues such as fundamental freedoms or environmental concerns, access to information, access to justice, and transparency and accountability remain hard to come by. Independent journalists are also under threat in Kazakhstan. A good example is the case of Lukman Akhmedyarov, an independent journalist who has written about corruption in Kazakhstan for many, many years. For years, he's been repeatedly detained by the Kazakhstani police, most recently in June. During that detention, it became clear that he was also wanted by the Russian authorities for reporting about the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Environmental justice issues continue to be critical in Kazakhstan, with extractive industries wreaking havoc on local communities, including at the Kokshida oil field in western Kazakhstan. Environmental defenders and local community members seek to protect a massive the threat to clean water and reverse a transmission over 300 wells that are spewing toxins into the air and threatening the aquifer. Crude Accountability has documented exceedances of maximum permissible concentrations of the field that are over 100 times the limit, placing local communities at grave threat for environmental health problems. Repeated efforts to engage with government officials on this issue have been unsuccessful. Turning to Turkmenistan. There is no freedom of the press, no freedom of expression or assembly, no fair and free elections, and no functioning judicial system. Civil society is forced underground or out of the country because of draconian laws controlling non-governmental organizations. There is no political opposition, and the government is essentially run by the executive branch, a son-father team in which the son, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, is of enforced disappearances. The Prove They Are Alive campaign has documented 162 confirmed cases of enforced disappearances, and the actual number is likely much higher. This is not a historic crime, but one that continues. According to documentation from Prove They Are Alive, over 30 of the disappeared have served their full terms and have not been released, and there is no official word from the government about their cases. At least 29 individuals have died in custody while forcibly disappeared. Turkmenistan also enforces travel bans and engages in extraterritorial repression, working with the governments of other countries, including Turkey, to try to force Turkmen nationals to return to Turkmenistan, where they face likely repression, arrest, and torture, including the threat of disappearance in the notorious prison system. There are numerous other human rights violations, but time is short, so I will move on to recommendations. One specifically for Turkmenistan. The U.S. should maintain Jackson Vanik in Turkmenistan. Removing the sanctions at this stage would be perceived as a green light for further repression and for less accountability and transparency. Improvements in the country's human rights record must occur before any further openings in that relationship. And the U.S. government should support civil society in all 5 countries in Central Asia as part of its foreign policy. Our national security is intertwined with the security and safety of human rights defenders around the world, including in Central Asia. Authoritarianism breeds instability, and we must ensure human stability in our engagement with the region. Human rights defenders and members of civil society in the region rely on the international community to uphold international human rights standards, and this includes the United States. Supporting Central Asian civil society ensures that U.S. influence in the region continues, which is critical when considering the growing influence of China and Russia. Good governance, including support for civil society, makes for a better investment climate and ensures that responsible investors continue to want to.
In 2 countries, I want to thank Chairman McGovern, I want to thank Todd Stein, and of course my courageous co-panelists and activists. I also, in addition to my role as a professor at the University of Southern California, I lead an organization called The Detained, and we document the conditions of political prisoners around the globe, especially in the former Soviet space. Before I get into the 3 countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, you mentioned that I think what we're talking about here today is a newfound assertiveness in the human rights abuses, pattern of violations of human rights in Central Asia continues Some of the prisoners there that I might mention are the deputy head of the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan, which is a democratic party, Mahmoud Ali Khaït, in prison for life. He's been tortured repeatedly. Or we can look to imprisoned Amiri journalist Ufat Khanim Mohammad Shoaiba, who received over 20 years, worked with USAID, and is in terrible health. Or the imprisoned rights lawyer, Buzurg Merior, which the Lentos Commission has adopted and promoted, who has received 28 years, although that sentence has shifted at many times, downward and upward and downward slightly. Now, USCIRF has designated Tajikistan as a country of particular concern repeatedly, and yet no sanctions have ever been applied, including on the Karakalpakstan. One of the troubling practices we've seen on political prisoners is the resuscitation of a Soviet-era practice of forced psychiatric detention for those that criticize the president or engage in sensitive issues. We have the case of, other than Davlet Muratov, of course, we have the case of Valijon Kalonov, who is a blogger that the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has determined this is an unlawful and arbitrary imprisonment. And Shahida Salomova, also who worked on the issue of forced evictions in Tashkent. Both have been placed in forced psychiatric detention indefinitely, which is a method that again, sounds like it should be in a history book about the Soviet Union, but is happening today. If I turn to Kyrgyzstan briefly, I'll mention that this is the case, this is the country in the region that has probably experienced the most dramatic transformation, the most dramatic deterioration. And now, unfortunately, having once been referred to as the so-called island of democracy, with the most vibrant media and NGO sector, has been of his wife for 18 months, Mohabbat, which is a case that is just exemplifies how bad things have gotten. I'll mention again that I was detained and deported in front of a group of 16 USC students on May 19th. We had gone there several years running for a class on human rights in Central Asia and had meetings with the government to discuss human rights. And my students really got a lesson before their eyes when I was detained and deported and forced back on a plane. I'll turn quickly then, since time is short, to my recommendations, which echo, I think, those of the co-panelists, that the US government, and what can Congress do, and of course the US government as a whole, should redouble efforts to secure the release of political prisoners by introducing legislation. And I understand that there's only been 2 bills introduced that mention the words human rights this year in Congress. It can introduce legislation that would condition U.S. assistance on improvements in human rights abuses and human rights issues in Central Asia, especially with regard to
comment on whether that is accurate in your experience, and whether you have, and Steve just spoke to this, what your sort of level of engagement is with embassies, or with the U.S. embassies in those countries, and the State Department.
I might start just because of having been in the region, just gotten back from Kazakhstan, I should say, and I wasn't permitted into Kyrgyzstan, I wasn't in Kazakhstan, but what I heard, and my students heard studying political science and international relations time and time again, was that this lack of U.S. support, the absence, the disappearance of USAID, the message that is sent when Radio Free Europe is unallowed to do its work, makes it open season on journalists, on human rights defenders. There was a palpable sense of disillusionment with what has happened and a feeling of being abandoned among civil society. And that's coming from our partners in Kyrgyzstan, like Bird-We-Know, a very courageous organization, and others across Kazakhstan. And I think, again, the political prisoners across Central Asia's jails feel it the worst because no one is able to get the word out about the torture that's happening to Davlet Murat. And of course, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan remain in sort of total lockdown. So I think what we want to see, what I've heard time and time again from human rights defenders, is they want the Assistant Secretary of State for Rights and Labor to make these issues come to life again. They want to hear high-level U.S. officials raising these issues regularly, not just behind closed doors, but publicly and in writing and in speeches.
Quickly, does anyone else have a comment?
Could I add on that just briefly, just to provide maybe a concrete example of what that change in policy ends up being in real life? You all may have seen there was a deal struck last month or this month even on rare earth minerals in Kazakhstan mining for tungsten.
Question? If not, we can open it up to our other guests for questions. Does anyone raise your hand? Any question?
I want to answer that.
Okay, please.
About the question you said about C5+1. I could answer it with one sentence. Becoming a KGB from human being is easy, but becoming a human being from KGB is impossible. C5+1, all the Central Asian dictators meet with America. All of them are former KGBs. And it is impossible to let them respect human rights. It is impossible. For example, in Kazakhstan, they have a lot of American company. For example, 1.1 billion tungsten project. And second is American oil and gas company in Kazakhstan. Everybody knows. After that, he sentenced 19 of Kazakh human rights activists, led by Begzat Maksutov, now in prison, in 5 years prison. And my sister, now held in Kazakhstan as a hostage. Kazakh KGB called through my sister, said, hold, stop all my activism, even I was in America. You want to control me? So C5+1 is failure. It is impossible. Kazakhstan is now worse than North Korea. Kazakhstan already become second Xinjiang. All the scholars who studied, made research about the Xinjiang concentration camps, now they could go to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan already becoming Xinjiang.
Thank you so much to the Commission to put together this timely, important conversation. My question is a little bit, I would like to hear your thoughts, protecting American interests, protecting American investments. On this side, on the European continent, there are shifts as well in terms of geopolitical situation, war with Ukraine, where Europeans are seeking into new resources to cover their energy needs. There were visits in a couple of years by Macron, big promises of investments in the regions. Looking through that lens, how would you protect American interests and American commitments of those governments, if there are? How would you guide, or what would be advice for this administration, for example? How would you look at protecting American interests while also promoting human rights, labor standards, corporate accountability, and all of that?
Could you introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Jasmine Cameron. I'm a human rights lawyer and
From Kazakhstan?
visiting school at American University.
You work for Kazakh government?
No.
She testified before the Panelist Commission.
Oh, okay.
I really appreciate it.
Go ahead. Yes, so first I want to address earlier question by Howard about our work. I used to work with DRL office of the State Department, and unfortunately it was dissolved, and right now it's not clear if human rights even matter at the State Department. It has been really challenging to navigate, and I lost my contacts. Most of them, they were laid off at the State Department. And back to your question, I think these Central Asian countries, they are actually, I think it's a really serious concern in the long run to cooperate with barbaric authoritarian regimes, that it will fire back. Maybe it's not as clear right now, it's all business, but in a matter of years, US government will reap what they sow, and my recommendation is for them to have string attached. If they're selling military tools to those authoritarian governments, at least they should make sure that it's not used against peaceful dissent, or also I used to work on US presidential initiative, African Global Opportunity Act, when certain products from the African countries entered US without customs fees. But in order to be eligible for that treaty, they had to improve on human rights, freedom of...
I agree completely with what Gulia said. I agree completely with what Gulia said, and thank you, Jasmine, for the question. I think that U.S. business interests are not served when corruption is allowed to flourish in Central Asia. What we have seen in the pattern of arrests is that those bloggers and journalists and activists that raise issues of government corruption, or the members of the presidential families being involved in a lot of these deals, are put in prison, which then hinders the ability for U.S. interests to have an accurate understanding of what they're getting into. There's no stability in that market, and the court system does not work. My lawyer, who is now defending me on my deportation case in Kyrgyzstan, over the long term, I think, for the U.S. economic objective, which is very worrying. And I think one thing that other recommendation I might make to this administration is one thing where we've seen some hope in the last year has been on the release of political prisoners in Russia and in Belarus by this administration's special envoy on political prisoners. So if we have such close relationships, if we have C5+1, if we have Tokayev and Mirziyoyev sitting at the General Assembly on the sidelines with President Trump talking so closely now, then why can't we see that translate into the release of political prisoners across this region? I think that's something that is doable and should happen under this administration. So we can advance business interests by protecting human rights. I'll mention one last blogger who was in prison on corruption issues was Abdulkadir Muminov in Uzbekistan, getting 7 years for raising issues of corruption. That's absurd if the U.S. wants to advance its economic objectives over the long term. So I hope that will happen.
Thank you so much. I so much apologize, but someone else has the room at 12:30, and we have to be mindful of that. I wanted to thank all of our guests, our panelists for coming today, and all of our guests for coming. We're going to have to leave the room, but I'm happy to facilitate conversations outside. And again, we welcome your presentations, happy to make them part of the record, and happy to promote these, the recommendations.